Hello, 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 everyone. So glad for you to join us here on Write Your Family History. My name is Devin Noel Lee, and if this is your first time watching, please let me know in the comments. I love to welcome newbies. And if you are a regular, as always, check in. Let me know how your writing projects are going. Today, we're going to focus on a little bit of writing motivation. Every year, hundreds, maybe even thousands of people consider the idea of writing family histories. Is that you? How's it going? Let me know. But one of the challenges many budding family historians and genealogists have is roadblocks. They have writing roadblocks that prevent them from actually writing and completing their family histories or even their personal histories, because today's personal history is tomorrow's family history. So, question: what stops you from writing your family histories? If you are an experienced researcher and writer, what stopped you in the past? And what suggestions do you have for overcoming the roadblocks? So, I would love to have this conversation happen just with my suggestions that I have here, as well as in the comments after the video is over. So, we're going to go through some of the ideas people shared of what prevents them from writing their family history and give you some tips on how to overcome these obstacles. As we go through, I would love to know who you identify with. There are names or handles, if you will, associated with each comment. If you identify with that one, just put that person's name in the comments stream, and then we can find out if you're the only one or if this is a challenge that few people have. So let's start with the first one, shall we? Okay. I have so much anxiety about starting. Oh my goodness, anxiety about starting. So, I want to try to tackle a little bit about anxiety. Now, there is a YouTuber podcaster. He's with the Dave Ramsey group, and his name is John Deloney. He wrote a book called Building a Non-Anxious Life. And I have really enjoyed listening to him talk about anxiety. And a couple of things that he talks about is anxiety isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's kind of like a fire alarm in a house. Its job is to signal to you if there is something harmful, but you don't want a fire alarm going off all the time and warning you about things that don't need to be warned about. So perhaps anxiety is your body telling you it's in danger and it's trying to protect you. But let's talk about a couple of anxiety issues, okay? What could be a source of anxiety in writing a family history? You may have anxiety that you're not good enough and people will hate what you write because they've hated what you've done in the past. So maybe your mind and body is trying to protect you from experiences you had in the past that told you you weren't good enough. Well, guess what? When it comes to family history, your English teacher is not marking up your book for a grade. So if you had that problem like I did, set it aside. Your body is trying to protect you, but this is one of the times the fire alarm is going off and it really shouldn't be. Um, Perhaps your problem is you don't have enough time for this, that your body is like, you don't have enough time to write. You really, truly don't. Well, let's think of a solution. What could be a solution if you don't feel like you have enough time to write? If you are going through massive life changing events, maybe divorces or health issues or challenges with children, maybe devoting a lot of time is not beneficial. But maybe in the downtimes, like waiting for your kids at swim practice, waiting for your x-ray time slot to take place. I've had that happen to me before. Waiting for an x-ray took an hour wait after my assigned time. You could maybe use these waiting moments to do a little bit of writing. But to schedule hours and hours and hours to write, maybe your body's saying you don't have time for one more thing. So maybe the solution is to find the small times that you do have to write a little bit here or there. Um, and maybe you're feeling a little bit of anxiety because your body is saying, this is hard. It is hard for you to write. You don't know what to write. You don't have enough knowledge. Well, maybe the solution is to watch a channel like this or just start. Just start, because a little bit of incremental changes in doing hard things can result in great results. For instance, I have been trying to lose 30 pounds since July. I have lost 20, almost 25. It fluctuates right now in that 5-pound range. The first hard thing I had to do was stop eating sugary sweets every day and just move it to Sundays. The first month, it was hard. It was hard to just have sweets on Sunday. And by the time Christmas rolled around, for the most part, I was pretty good. But my mother-in-law makes these Lostic cookies, and they're just incredibly delicious. And I broke down a little bit. And so the next week, it was hard to start over again. But I can tell you, I have no problem generally not having sweets throughout the week and only having them on Sunday. I look forward to Sunday sweets. So perhaps your body is anxious because it's telling you this is going to be hard. But one of the other things John Deloney says is when there are hard things, push through. Push through it because maybe your body is a little bit wrong. Okay, I have a couple of people who have shared some of their thoughts. They really appreciate the advice about the anxiety of, it might be what your body is trying to tell you. So assess and then look for solutions. And then here's a solution when you think you're too busy to write. Um, June schedules 15-minute time frames, and you will be surprised how much you can get done in 15 minutes. So maybe that 15 minutes waiting for the doctor or the 15 minutes at a swim practice, depending on what stage of life you're in, or maybe instead of playing games on your phone, you can spend 15 minutes writing. None of us have the being distracted by phone games, do we? So yeah, take advantage of those fun times, 15-minute blocks that you have. Okay. Oh no. I had a wonderful slide that I had that was a solution for, there it is. Here we go. I'm going to bring it up. Oh, I know why. I did make a change. And then when we went live, I thought, oh, I don't like that change. And now I like the change. So that's why we come live, because you see all some of my goofs here. But here is one of the things that John Deloney says: solve for peace. Now, how could this apply to family history and writing your family histories, solving for peace? Well, raise your hand, type me in the comments. Do you feel guilty that you haven't written anything yet? And you've been thinking about writing for years? I'm going to type me for sure. Me. So I have been wanting to create some scrapbooks of my personal history for 10 years, but I had kids, we had homeschooling, we had COVID, we had moves, we had some health challenges, on and on and on and on. And I kept feeling guilty that I didn't do this personal family history project. And so instead, from the YouTube channels, I took a break last July and I solved for peace. I needed to fill my cup, and I worked on my personal history scrapbooks, and I got all the way caught up. So in our scrapbooks, my husband and I are finally married. Granted, we've been married for 25 years, but finally, we have this scrapbook of our marriage. And that was how I solved for peace. So solve for peace rather than stopping because you feel anxious about starting to write. find solutions that will bring you peace. And I fully believe that you will accomplish so much. And you will see in the comments and in the chat that other people, they have, are like me, I have a lot of challenges and I have to solve for peace. So you're not alone. So thank you for those of you who shared that we're all in the same boat together. Okay, so let's do another little part. It's tied to the anxiety. And if you feel like any of these people, let me know in the comments. Edward said he's worried about perfectionism, and that's a big roadblock for him to writing family histories. Amy says, I might include something wrong and mislead future generations. And then Anna says, I don't trust my memory. So as you can see, some of this applies to writing about ancestors, and other stories or other comments may focus on our personal history. Do you feel like any of them? Do you struggle with perfectionism? Are you worried that you're going to get something wrong? Do you not trust your own memories? Let's see. I think there were a couple other comments I wanted to tie to this one. Yes, I did. There was, what would others think? Others may object to my memories. And how will it be received by my family when discussing painful and less than pleasant memories? So these are all ideas that you may have because you're building up that anxiety, right? And so that you don't want to start because you're worried about these challenges. So I'm going to come once again and say, solve for peace. Write the best you can. Put in your best effort. Don't worry about being perfect, because guess what? How many of you have read a book or a novel from a publishing house and you find errors in the book? How many of you have watched a movie and there are huge plot holes in the movie or goofs? I remember a movie that I just watched and there was a ship. Oh, yes, it was a Three Musketeers that had Orlando Bloom in it. If you've seen that, let me know. It wasn't bad, but they built this Zeppelin type balloon with a ship and then landed on this building, and that spire hadn't even been created yet. It would eventually be on this iconic building that the movie was set in. But the time of the movie and the time of construction of this spire that poked the shipbuilding flying contraption wasn't even in there. So don't worry about being perfect, because chances are you're going to be wrong about something. When you're worried about accuracy, how do we solve for accuracy? How do we solve for peace? Well, we cite our sources. We use language that says, it's possible that this happened. I believe this happened. Use the appendix or footnote and say, hey, this is my best guess at this time. Here's some information. You decide. Yes, there will be errors. There will be new information that comes to life, and that's okay. A moderately flawed book where your intent was to provide an accurate family history to the best of your skills and the available research right now is far better than intentionally setting out to write a fraudulent family history. If you intend to write a fraudulent family history, future generations are going to be mad. But if you did the best you can with the available evidence that you had and the skills that you had at the time, we're going to praise you for what you did do and then make a second edition to correct the things you get wrong. So solve for peace. Solve for peace. Linda had a wonderful strategy. I put a disclaimer in the preface of the story. Fantastic. I love that solution. There are so many books that will say, hey, if there's any flaws, it's a flaw because I didn't have the available evidence at the time. So please double check my work and don't discount everything, because I did my absolute very best to get it right. But if something needs to be corrected, don't discount the whole book, just correct that one small thing. Bridget did that as well. She went ahead and added a disclaimer in her preface. Here's what I would love to do. If you guys could share some of your thoughts of the disclaimer that you might put in a preface, what would you say? Because it may be one thing to say, hey, put a disclaimer in the preface. And then some of us may feel anxiety of getting that wrong. So why don't we collaborate a little bit? Share what do you say as a disclaimer? And let's share some of those thoughts if you guys don't mind. That would be fantastic. Here is another tip that goes with the time constraints. Small tidbits shared with family helps me move forward. I love that. Where you feel like you don't have a lot of time. This could also solve the concern of you're not sure what the feedback could be. Share a little tidbit. See if the family is like, yeah, this is great. Keep it up. You may get a little boost of encouragement. Somebody may give you some corrections so that you don't put all your effort into publishing a bound book and then find out you have more mistakes that somebody could have prevented had you shared. Great tips to solving for peace and for dealing with that anxiety. So it seems like some of us have had anxiety or still have anxiety to deal with when it comes to writing our stories. Okay, so the next of roadblock, this one, it comes from SR Bodlack. I am completely overwhelmed by the prospect of writing my family history or even my own personal history. If you can relate to SR Bodlack, write SR Bodlack in the comments, or overwhelmed, that's me. Something to that effect. Let's see who else struggles with this roadblock. While you comment on whether you can relate, I have something I want to share. Okay, I'm going to leverage Dave Ramsey one more time. Some of you may have heard of the debt snowball effect, where you line up your debts smallest to largest, and then you pay off your debts smallest to largest so that you build this snowball effect of tackling the largest one instead of trying to tackle the largest and then seeing all the little ones hanging around and driving you nuts. You pay off a little one because you get a small win. Then you take the money from the little one and apply it to the next one, pay that off. You've got a little bit bigger win. And slowly but surely you go and you tackle the bigger debt. Okay, this isn't a finance channel, but this analogy does relate. Let's call it the writing snowball effect. Write about an ancestor one document at a time, except for maybe a city directory, which is very, very, very short. It's usually just one line and it's not enough to get you to go on. I want you to start with a small document first, something to the effect, or maybe not even small, just easiest. For instance, maybe you have a birth record with the name, date, and place of birth for a person and their parents, right? That's relatively small. You've got one event and 3 people. You can quickly write a paragraph and then you can process any other extra details that is in that document. Then you move to the next document and you process that document because now you have the information from that first document that relates to the second. The second may correct some stuff from the first. This second may give more details to support the first, or it may expand the rest of the life story. You see what you're saying? And then you go and on with your documents. What I would hate for you to do is to start with a 90-page pension record and say, that's going to be my starting document. While it has a lot of information, it can be overwhelming. Instead, start with something smaller, something more easy to tackle, and then process document by document by document. The other thing I'm going to also say is another way to think of this writing snowball effect is maybe this is you, and this is your parents, and this is your grandparents, and this is your great grandparents. We need a double G. Notice how we're doing a snowball this way. because tackling a multi-generational book is quite difficult. But if you start with yourself and write a little bit about yourself, and then part of your story is going to carry over to your parents. And then part of your story and your parents' story will carry over to your grandparents' story. And it keeps going on like that. That was one of the strategies that I used to write about 120 ancestors in a year. It was a first draft, but I could easily take one of the stories for a parent or a grandparent, switch the focus person, and now I could write about the next ancestor and pull in different parts and delete the parts that I didn't know. So let us not so much worry about what was the original prompt here. The overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed. Oop, gotta get this off. I'm overwhelmed by the prospect of writing a personal or a family history. Instead, let's go ahead, skip forward, and use the writing snowball effect. If you like the writing snowball effect, let me know some feedback in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think about the writing snowball effect. I don't know if anybody's actually coined that phrase or even borrowed the phrase, but I really do like that concept and I have found it really works well. I'm going to take a brief moment for those who attended the live session to bring in a couple of their comments. Now, Linda has a little bit of anxiety that said, I'm afraid I will die before I finish the stories as I don't think my family will look at the database. Now, the database issue is going to be a forever challenge, right? And I will agree that my kids don't look at my database, but my family has read the stories. So I just moved things around. This book right here, this Joseph Geisler, I sent copies to distant cousins because I don't have any living close cousins who's descendants of Joseph, but I did have some distant cousins. And I will tell you, they read the book. They really, truly enjoyed that book because they weren't going to look at the database. Now, this book right here, I moved this. This is about my life story, about 3 years of when I competed in pageants as a teenager. Last night, I went to a mother-daughter activity, and there were a number of questions of getting to know mom. And my daughter already knew the answers because she read that book. So it was pretty challenging, pretty interesting. But the question comes back to, I'm afraid I will die before I finish the stories. So, if you have read my book, A Recipe for Writing Family History, this is a roadmap to draft your stories as quickly as possible and to get the massive amount of information that you know out of your brain. But you're going to have to set a limit. What is achievable? And the reason why I can relate to this, I'm afraid I will die before I finish these stories, is because in 2012, my last living grandparents and my last living parent died, the grandparent in January and my mother in December. So that was a very difficult year for me. And I suddenly was the person that knew the family stories. And so I set about looking for a strategy to write before anything happened to me. And that's 2012. And it's what, 12 years ago. I do still have those 120 drafts because one of the other things I did after I did write the first drafts is I started a YouTube channel, and that's taken a lot of my time. But in 4 years, my youngest will be graduated from high school, and then Auntie and I will start having a lot more free time to work on our projects. So then I'll tackle the other drafts. But my family can pick up the stories I've already started because they're in my drive and we all know how to use Google Drive. So that's one of the solutions I have. If you have other solutions for how to deal with that anxiety and solve for peace, I would love to hear what you guys have to share. Okay. This comment comes from June. Here's her recommendation of how to include something into a preface to let people know that, hey, this is my best work. To the best of my knowledge and point of view as I remember it. Oh, this is fantastic. We could tweak it. Perhaps we can tweak it if you need to because this kind of sounds like my memories of my family. If you tweaked it to an ancestral view, to the best of my knowledge and point of view as I have researched it. Let me know if you think you need to tweak it or not, but I really, really love that. Um, let's see. Oh, here's an idea. This one ties back to Linda. I leak my ancestry tree in my intro, so if I can't finish, somebody can take over from my online tree. Now, one of the things you might want to consider is make sure your tree is public so they can take over, because nobody can actually take over your individual account on Ancestry, but they can take over from the public information you provide. All right. And I love this. This is from P. Smith. My family knows what I'm doing and will be going through my computer when I die. I'm so glad. I'm so glad your family is close, and then that is going to be solution for you. I know when my mom was passing away, one of the first things I did was I tried to get onto her computer, find out any of the research related files that she had that I wanted to grab. I went and all grabbed all of her photos, and then I grabbed any personal documents. So strive to label photos and document folders in such a way that when your descendants, if you have them, the people who are surviving to take over your things when you're done, they know this is genealogy, this is important, and this is, my cat videos or my silly stuff that you don't need. I have things for homeschooling, and I have things for um, lessons I've prepared for church. They don't need to necessarily keep those. So mark your files in such a way that people know, okay, these are the keywords to look for. I really, really like this. Notes are private on Ancestry. That is correct. But comments aren't. So keep that in mind. Great tip, June. All right, let's go to the next roadblock and let me know if you can relate to this one. I don't consider myself an accomplished writer, so I'm nervous about writing about my family history. At this point, though, I'm the family historian and I know things that other family members don't, and I don't want the information lost when I'm gone. If you can relate to Julie, let me know in the comments, because I know that I struggled with this, and I'll tell you why in a moment. A similar idea to the one that Julie had is I am not a writer, but I know the stories. I freeze up when I try to write. Okay. First of all, remember when we talked about anxiety, and I said your body's trying to tell you something, and it's up to you to try to figure out if it's a warning bell or if it's annoyance. So when I was in middle school, I was not good at all with syntax and punctuation. I struggled completely. My papers were marked up all the time. In college, it continued when I worked with the Dallas Fort Worth International Airport in the marketing department for the airport, not the airlines, the airports. Andy Kahn, who was my boss, I would turn in reports, and I really strived to make sure that I had proper syntax, and he would send it back marked up. This is before the days of Grammarly, which I use all the time, and even still, when I have a Grammarly helper, I have problems, and I don't feel like I'm a good writer as far as syntax go. But I do feel after years of practicing writing, I wrote for 16 years with my mom. She had a pageant newsletter called Turn for the Judges. Um, and I would write various articles for her. She would handle the syntax, I would handle the content, and I got better. So here's another way to think of this analogy, and it is from swimming. Okay. Do swimmers qualify for and then win gold medals just starting out? No. No, they don't. They practice. They first start learning the basic mechanics of the strokes and how to breathe in the water. That's the first thing they have to learn. And they practice the technique of the stroke and breathing again and again and again and again. And then they learn about tempo, stroke counts, flip turns, dive starts, and all the other technical aspects for swimming and how to make it legal so an official like me doesn't disqualify them. But they can't learn tempo, stroke counts, and flip turns and so forth if they don't first learn the basics of how do you do a butterfly stroke versus how do you do a backstroke and so forth. You don't become a better swimmer if you don't practice, and therefore you don't become a better writer if you don't practice. So, how do you practice? Well, first, you write something, write anything. And on this channel, I believe I've showed with you through the writing challenges and from the training videos, I've told you how to start writing something. Start with the document, extract the information, mark it up so that you understand what's is going on, and then build to the next story and build to the next story. You can learn the mechanics of writing after you've finished your first draft. You can't if the first draft is still stuck in your head. If you agree with that, let me know. So Linda can relate to Julie. Thanks for participating in that. I like to see what people can feel. So, Linda, I hope those tips helped you out. P. Smith says some of the AI tools are helping to spice up writing. Absolutely, absolutely. But in previous videos, I have talked about how the fact that I have found the AI writing tools work better when you've written something than when it gives you a few facts and say, give me a story. And that's how I've found it writes up. Sweet. Okay. All right. So here's the next roadblock that I have found people have. Catherine, determining who to start with is my problem. Can you relate? And if you have finally started, how did you decide who to start with? Now, in genealogy, we often say start with yourself and work backwards. And I'm going to give you the tip of this. Start with an ancestor that doesn't have a mountain of resources or a dearth of resources. But do try to start with someone you have a birth, marriage, and death record for, because you can then write this story, and we can write this story using the documents have available. Then if you have a document in between, you can write through these stories and you have a life story. Now remember, this will be the all important first draft. After you have a first draft, you can go back and you can improve your storytelling processes. But I would highly recommend you start with an ancestor who has all three, so you gain the experience you need in writing about those three major events in someone's life, and then go apply it to someone who has fewer records. And you can also go to the one that has more records. But the person that you don't want to start writing with, if you don't have a lot of experience, don't start with the person multiple people have already written about. Because if you don't have writing experience, what else are you truly going to add? Instead, write about somebody who hasn't been written about, that have those three life events documents, get the experience, and then you can start tackling some of those other ancestors. And yes, it can start very simply. I am born. Very, very true. The first sentence. If you've been to any of my writing workshops or if you read a recipe for writing family history, how do you start? You turn a name, date, and place into a simple sentence. And in this case, I am born. Or Fred was born on the 25th of January, 1913 in New Hampshire somewhere. I was trying to think of a specific place in New Hampshire and I failed miserably. I do apologize. But It starts with a simple sentence based on a document, and then you tie those documents together. So I hope that we can overcome the anxiety that people feel when they think of, I don't know who to start with. And so this person can be anywhere on your family tree, anywhere. So it could be your dad, it could be your great granduncle, it can be anybody on your family tree. Just start with those three basic records and you will have a lot more success. Okay. All right, so let's go to anxiety, the next one. And I think a number of you on this channel can relate to Kimberly. I struggle with what to include. I don't want it to be too long, but I want to give an accurate picture of what life was like for her, the person she's writing about, and share those unique experiences. Other people who have the similar roadblocks say it this way: I don't know what to include because there's a lot to write. Oh my gosh, I would love to have that problem with some of my ancestors. And Judith said, how do I limit all the stories that come to mind, whether this be personal history or it be the family history stories? Well, this is when I'm going to tell you there is a difference between drafting and publishing. Okay? There is a big difference between drafting and publishing. When you are drafting the stories, include everything and the kitchen sink and the neighbor next door. Include everything, because the drafting phase is not the decision-making phase. The drafting phase is the story creation or the idea gathering phase. Then when you go into the editing phase, we're still not at publishing. We're at the editing phase. The first step, and I have a playlist on this, is called developmental editing. And people tend to skip that step. They try to shove it in before you even start writing, and you should never do that. Put it at the second step. You've written your draft. You've written everything. You've recorded every single story you can think of, plus the ones your cousins put in. After that, it's time to do the developmental editing stage. And what is that? Well, developmental editing is when you decide your audience. Wait a minute. Other educators say you decide it before you start writing. No, you don't. You don't know the story as it's going to play out until it's on paper. And then you can start going, okay, now who would benefit from this story? Maybe you have a fun little story in the life of this ancestor, the overall life that kids are going to love. I've talked about this before. Andy's grandfather served in World War II and had this misadventure of mishaps taking planes from Utah the long way around the world to China. That story can be a standalone story. And so I'm not going to include things outside of that journey and what happened to. And then maybe I'll insert a little bit about his wife back home and praying that her new husband would return. But I'm not going to put his, 8 children and his million grandchildren and all that other stuff. I'm just going to focus on the airplane story. But if I write for his children and his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren, his entire life, then I'm going to include stories about his entire life, growing up in California, meeting his wife, becoming a pilot after the war, and so on and so forth. You decide your audience after you have content and in order to say, oh, this story would fit for children. This one would be good for a longer chapter book rather than a picture book. You get the idea. There is a big difference between drafting and publishing, and that is how you know what to write and what to include, because there is so much. So that when you get to after you you make those decisions in the developmental phase, then you revise your content. Then you deal with the syntax, then you format it, then you publish it. So don't put the cart before the horse. Let me say it one more way. Draft, then select your audience, then revise for the audience and get it to the publication stage. Let me know what you think about that, if that helps you or not, if you have any other tips for those people who struggle with that phase of anxiety of how do I know what to include? I think include everything, because what happens if you do die before you actually make these other books? Well, it's there for someone else to pick up where you left off. Oh, I love this. So P. Smith says my current book is 600 pages. The final draft would be about 300. Now, is that 600 pages of just text, or does it also include documentation stuff, so forth, to jazz it up and make it more visually appealing? Thanks, June. I should have put publish on that last size, but I'm glad that you like it. Draft, choose your audience, revise, and publish. And then when I asked about P. Smith about how many pages, it is everything, the written and the enhancements. That's good. Good job. So proud of you. Good job. One of the persons I had a discussion with at Roots Tech, she was wondering, hey, do I put sources and all this stuff I'm writing for the children? And I was like, well, it would be really good if you wrote a children's book and then take some of this other stuff that you had and make it for, your adult relatives or the children when they become adults, because they'll enjoy this children's story and then you can do this longer book. They said, oh my gosh, that freed my mind and took away the anxiety of what to write about and what to include or not include in the children's story, because I can have a second line that is more thorough. So I really hope that you can get past this writer's block, roadblock of, do I include everything? Include everything in the draft phase. Absolutely. And then go through the process we just shared. Okay, the next roadblock. I like this one. It's an interesting roadblock. Maybe some of you have something similar. So Dagny said, I've started multiple times on a great-grandfather's stories. It's just that he had a complicated life and I keep wondering where to start. Okay, drawing time. I love the whiteboard, even though I really have a green board. Okay, where do you start? Well, you start by processing your documents. If you thought I was going to say anything different, then no, it really is that simple. Start with processing the documents. Okay, so now you've processed the documents, but this is correct, this is correct, this is correct. But then we have something that's not correct here, not correct here. This whole thing is not correct, right? This one has a small correction. And then maybe we have some that causes, I guess you can't really see that color. Let me get there we go. We've got questions. But then, wait a minute. Maybe you have some commentary and some logic, right? And so this goes together, this goes together, this goes together, maybe that goes together. Do you see how it suddenly becomes a complicated mess? However, how do you get through the complicated mess? Well, we go back one document at a time, step by step, reproving the research so that you can do your best to tell the story so far as you have researched it. And you throw that disclaimer in the preface that others have shared, and then you've tackled that story. So I will tell it for every person trying to write. Start with the documents you have. If you're writing your personal history, start with the photographs that you have. Photographs are a gateway to memories. They really are. And then go to the artifacts that you have. I have a number of pictures from when I was in color guard, but not as many as the artifacts that I have, the trophies, the medals. I even have the routine written out for 1 year's performance. That can help me trigger even more memories. So start with your photos, then you go to your artifacts, maybe wall arts, maybe home videos, and then start asking if you're writing about yourself, other people that you know and the memories they have. Do you see what I'm saying? So start, no matter what you're doing, start with one document at a time and build up. Okay. Okay, I need you keyboard warriors to get ready because we're going to have an interactive activity. I'm going to show you a picture here in a moment, just getting you ready. So I'm going to show you a picture and ask you what you call it because it's related to this. Jeb says, sometimes it's finding the right words is my roadblock. Okay, here's our activity. In this picture, there are vehicles traveling on this side of this thing. What do you call the road on this side of this thing? And I'm being intentionally vague because I want you guys to let me know what you call this road on this side of this thing. And okay, fantastic. Fantastic. We've got some answers coming in. First, we have June saying the ramp. P. Smith calls it a frontage road. Let's see if anybody else, I'll give you just a moment or two. What do you call this road on this side of this thing? Got quite a few of you watching, so let's have you give it a chance. And it's not a popularity contest, so type what you call that road. Road next to the freeway. Okay. Like that. Good job. Anyone else? Ooh, that's a new one. A service road or a frontage road. Thank you, Linda. All right. Well, you guys are all wrong. Okay, you're not really all wrong. But notice we have multiple things that we can call that road. But if you are a Houstonian, we call it a feeder road because it feeds into that other road, which we have to now. The next part of this activity is oops, I hit the wrong thing. What do you call this road? Now, P. Smith calls it a freeway. What would you call this road? Give you guys a chance to put it in. And it's all related. I'm going to go back 2 pictures while you're given a moment to type. Sometimes I struggle finding the right words. Okay. So first we had a ramp, a frontage, a road next to the freeway, the service road, or Houstonians call it a feeder road. And now we have some other folks sharing their ideas. June calls it a highway. Linda calls it a freeway. We have another highway. Well, some people could call it an interstate. They could call it the state highway. They may call it the overpass or the passover or the bypass or the loop. Do you get the idea of what I'm trying to get you to think? So let's tie it back. It's finding the right words. Well, the right words is subjective because sometimes there is a right word. So if you're trying to think of a hat, what do you call the hat thing that soldiers wore if they were in the U.S. military during World War I? Depending on the service, it could have an actual name. Okay. If you're thinking of the nickname the Marines get, kind of a little bit derogatory, jarheads, right? Or pilots, their nickname are flyboy. There might actually be correct words, if you will, but in most other cases, as we showed with the roads cars travel on, it can be regional. It can be personal perspective. It could also be there is a word you should use versus the other. So, my point in saying all of that is don't worry about the right words. Write something. And then if you get into the editing phase, you write for clarity, right? Write for clarity. Because if you're not from Houston, and I call this road a feeder road, you may be laughing your head off and going, I don't know what that's called. So, sometime in my story about a Houstonian, I may go ahead and use that word feeder road, but I might have to have a little use it. The feeder road on I-45 north, wait. I-45 goes to the Woodlands. Oh my gosh, I haven't been in Houston. I'm pretty sure I-45 goes to Woodlands. It could actually go to Dallas, but I don't remember right now because I don't have my map up. But if I try to say, I know I-45 south goes to Galveston, let me use that one. If I say there an accident happened on I-45 south towards Galveston on the feeder road at some cross street, then at some point I could put it maybe in a footnote or parenthetical or something and let people know it's the service road or the frontage road so that other people understand the word in which I'm using. So don't necessarily worry about the right words. Instead, write for clarity. And as you put it in the editing phase and share it with other readers, they may come and say, what's a feeder road? I don't know what a feeder road is. And you go, oh, that's, you don't, I mean, I didn't know people didn't know that was a feeder road until I left Houston. And then I heard all these frontage roads. I'm like, what the heck is a frontage road? Right? And so when you're writing, somebody may say, hey, what's a feeder road? And then you explain it and they go, oh, gotcha. And you write for clarity, not necessarily rightness. So if you think that is a great solution for overcoming the rightness, wrongness, let me know. Take this moment, if you haven't already, like this video. I would love if you would share it with your writing and genealogy communities to help people start writing their stories. Okay. Let's go on to the next roadblock. Okay. When this one applies more to personal history than family history. If you can figure out how they relate to family history, let me know. But John says his struggle for writing about himself is embarrassment. I have done things I wish I hadn't. Carla says, I have done things I'm not proud of, and I'm not. Marina says she's worried about feeling judged. Okay. So we've all done embarrassing things, or embarrassing things have happened to us. In fact, last night I told my daughter about one of my embarrassing, awkward moment involved walking past these really hot senior high school boys while I was a freshman in high school. And I was in a hallway and I was walking by and there were these pillars and I passed the first pillar and I could tell that they were checking me out because I'd been checking them out. And they walked past the next pillar. And as I burped loudly. There's only one person it could have come from because it only came from one direction. There was no way it could be passed off as someone else. It was just me. And I was so embarrassed because all of a sudden I heard these hot senior boys cracking up and I couldn't run away fast enough. Now, that seems kind of a trivial, embarrassing story, but can you relate to something awkward and embarrassing happening? Sure. But it makes us human and helps us to connect with our loved ones. But there are some more serious things that we're ashamed of. We feel guilty about. In the beginning of this stream, I had talked about how I really like listening to the John Deloney podcast, and he will talk about a number of things that he feels shame for, right? Shame is I did something bad. Guilt is I am bad, right? Actually, I think I have that wrong. Guilt, I do have that wrong. Guilt is I did something wrong and I feel guilty about it. Shame is I am bad. No wonder I did that bad thing. And so when we're telling our stories, hopefully two things can happen. One, it can be therapeutic for us to go, I'm not bad. And sure, I feel guilty over these things that I did, but I learned from them and I grew from them. And I actually would like my children and my ancestor and my descendants to not make these dumb mistakes that I did, or to be forewarned. Don't take this path. It leads to heartbreak. Don't do it. Instead, do this. So, yeah, I can understand feeling embarrassed about the things you may have done because I'm embarrassed about some of the things I've done. But by telling my accurate story, I connect with my family and I can maybe help them overcome. The other thing I have to say, and I've said this on my channel and some of the shorts, when my dad passed away, I was angry. He left a mess of a situation behind. But then I started doing my genealogy. He had forbidden me for reaching out to his side of the family. There was a big family feud and he didn't want to talk, but I wanted to build the bridges. And I reached out to the relatives and I learned in that moment that my dad was my hero and he is to this day. And I wish I could tell him. He's been gone for 20 years. My dad was a raging, horrible alcoholic until shortly before I was born. And he stopped drinking and he changed his life. He did it without Alcoholics Anonymous. He did it without any kind of therapy. And sure, he still had problems, but he slayed a massive dragon. And alcoholism was not a part of my life. And he changed our family tree. And so while it may seem embarrassing or shameful to talk about the drunks that are on my family tree, not knowing the story of the drunks makes it impossible for me to understand what a hero my father was. So I'm begging you to not feel embarrassed and not try to hide who you are and the lessons you've learned from the things you've done. Because as you've done plenty of wrong things, you've also done plenty of right things. And you can leave an amazing legacy for the future if you will just tell the accurate truth. Okay. Whew. Continuing on with embarrassment, some people are stuck because there are painful memories to write about. Or I might hurt my family members with the painful memories that I may share. Again, there is a difference between, there's not an again. I've said in other places, there is a time and place of where to publish. And so I'll leave that for other videos or for a future video if I haven't covered it. Just because you write it doesn't mean you have to publish it for the world to see, but you should write it. The other thing I want to tell you is about a couple of books that have some painful memories in it. The first book is called My Sergei, about Yekaterina Gordieva and Sergei Grinkov. They were gold medalists from Russia for 2 years in a row, or 2 Olympics in a row in pairs. They were fantastic skaters. Loved watching them. I wanted to name one of my daughters Yekaterina. My husband wouldn't let me. But in any case, there are some really painful memories about Katya being so young and ignored during training, and Sergei blowing her off. Now, he's deceased at the time of her writing this story, so we can't really protest, but his family members might not have actually liked her writing those stories. But she did it in a way that was quite lovely. And then she talked about the painful memories of losing her husband. It is a touching, beautiful story. And I'm so glad she wrote it. Another biography or autobiography I enjoyed is Heather Whitestone. If you don't know who she is, she was Miss America in 1995, and she was also, so far as I know, the only deaf Miss America. And she had a lot of painful memories in her story of what it's like to be born deaf into a hearing family, learning to dance, and especially dance teachers who didn't want to help her, of pageant judges who didn't want to give her a reasonable accommodation so that she could participate into the interview competition. There were also, oh my gosh, embarrassing and painful memories of people who tried to invade her privacy when she was Miss America and she was going to the bathroom in a public bathroom. That story, all of those memories, they were probably painful, and some people might be hurt by some of the stories they shared. But there's so much healing and understanding to understand what Katerina went through and how she carried on with her daughter, Daria. To understand how amazing it was for Heather Whitestone to perform in Atlantic City while deaf, an amazing ballet to La Via della Rosa. You now understand the journey these women went through. And they're inspiring, but they do have painful memories. The way through is to write the stories. Now, here's what you shouldn't do, or a contrast of sorts. Spare by Prince Harry. Not a fan of that book. That book, from the opening pages, is designed to hurt his family members. I'm sorry, I can't read it any other way. I don't know his family. So it's just the tone and the stories he selected and how he wrote them. On one hand, you can say, well, it's his lived experience. Yeah, it's designed to hurt. Meanwhile, Hillbilly Elegy, don't know if you've read that one or heard about that one. There are some painful memories that author went through. That his mom was a drug addict and he had to live with his grandparents and just so many challenges. And when I read the book, and I actually even listened to the audio version, it did not feel like a hit piece against his family. It was just discussing painful memories and experiences and the life that he's living now. If you are worried about the painful memories and the hurt you might cause, I'm going to invite you to rewatch the Sensitive Stories webinar I have on this channel. It's free. It's always will be free. Watch that video, but then know your intent. I invite you not to ever publish a hit piece on your family members. Don't write to be spiteful. Don't write to harm and ruin somebody's character. However, if what you write causes hurt, and it may actually cause somebody's lose somebody's reputation because it's truthful without the intent to be vindictive, then I think you've written accuracy. And eventually, like the healing I got from learning about the alcoholism in my family, you can provide a gateway for others, both in your family and outside. So that's how you deal with the painful memories. Now, the other thing is, some of the painful memories writing are the ones you've experienced, and they are painful. So I'm going to invite you to do two things. One, take your time. And two, if necessary, reach out to a therapist and get help. That's what I would recommend. Now, if you don't like therapists, then share with your closest friends or family members and say, this is the memories I'm having. Help me work through the feelings. I invite you to help me. Our stories need to be recorded. Our ancestors and we aren't perfect angels, and there are a lot of painful memories. But the way through and the way to leave a legacy is to write to the best of your ability. I've suddenly made everybody silent in the chat. If you have any comments or questions, please pop them in. Okay, here is the last roadblock that I have pre-prepared. And this roadblock, I think, is probably the hardest one to reframe your mind so that you can actually write. How do I write so that what I write lifts and strengthens my posterity? You can't. You can't. You cannot control how people receive your stories. Well, actually, you can. You can avoid writing a hit piece. That's definitely not going to lift and strengthen your family. But lifting and strengthening is not your job. Lifting and strengthening is incredibly difficult to do, and it may cause you to take out stories that you judge not to lift and not to strengthen. So instead, I'm going to invite you to write truth. If you're writing about yourself, write in your own voice with your own experiences and your own thoughts, and let readers decide for themselves. Be as compassionate as you can about the others who came into our life. And again, go to Hillbilly Elegy. I think he did a very, very good job about writing in such a way that I could walk away with my own interpretation, whether I was going to be uplifted or I was going to understand or I was going to go forth and strengthen my character. Heather Whitestone, it was uplifting and strengthening, and I don't feel like it was intended to. I feel like it was, this is my story. This is how I became a Miss America despite being deaf. Leveraging my setbacks and turning them into positives. Okay. I don't truly believe that you can write to lift and strengthen without changing the accuracy of the story. You're going to leave things out that would strengthen one person instead of lifting them. So don't try to write lifting and strengthening. Just try to be neutral with your ancestors and let your reader decide for themselves. And with regards to yourself, write in your voice. I wrote a number of different stories. My father, love him dearly, after my very first pageant, um, it wasn't good. He didn't want me to do that pageant in the first place. He said it was money down the rat hole, and I told you so, money down the rat hole. And it hurt. But then someone came into his life and said I'd never amount to anything. And he's like, ha, I'm going to prove you wrong. Now, that could hurt to talk about my father in that way, but it also could strengthen and uplift. You know what? It was costly. But you know what? You're not going to put down my daughter. I want to be like my dad in that moment. You're not going to put down my kids. I'm going to be, have a reasonable expectation of what they're going to do in the pool. But you're not going to put them down because for a year, one daughter had to swim on her own because she had critical coaches and she had a sprained ankle that the injury kept flaring up and flaring up and flaring up, but she wants to swim. And she got in the pool. And even though she swam alone often, and I didn't know enough to help correct her technique, she got in the pool and she dropped time at every single meet. That's inspiring. Even though I'm not trying to be inspiring, I'm telling you what inspired me. So, Don't let this roadblock for preventing you from writing. Tell the stories and let it uplift where it wants to uplift and let it just convey information everywhere else. And you will not have the struggle in the future. Okay, I have gone I've been very long-winded in this session. If you have any comments or questions, I want you to start sharing them now. If I haven't covered a roadblock that's stopping you, I could stay on for a little bit longer, and we can address some of those. Let's see. Linda's roadblock is have more fun researching than writing. You know what? Initially, I was very much like you, Linda. But I know that as you watch this channel, especially the writing channels where I mark up things, it leads to more questions. So writing causes you to research more because it helps you process and analyze the different pieces as they come together, and it sends you back on more research questions, and then you write, and eventually you have to say, okay, I have to stop and publish this story and move on to somebody else. But I invite you to put my challenge to the set test. Include writing in your researching, and you just might find that you have more fun research questions to ask and to build your family tree. So that's my little soapbox. This is a roadblock for sure that I hadn't considered. Thank P. Smith for including that. Historical roadblocks is that there's incomplete history. There's also incomplete records or insufficient records. In that case, you do the very best you can. Joseph's book. I only had 4 records about his life, but I wrote 90 pages, 6x9 story because I included the history of the time period of German immigrants moving to Ohio and the challenges they faced. I was blown away by the challenges a German Catholic faced coming to America. You know, you think it's a land of opportunity and it was going to be so great, and it was a struggle. And moving here right before, so he moved after the failed German Revolution of 1848, and now he's in the United States when it's supposed to have the War of the Rebellion, the War for Secession, the Civil War, whichever way you want to use it, right? And so sometimes you can overcome lack of records about an ancestor by including historical references. That's one thing you could do. But there are some cultures that just don't have a lot of records and they don't have a lot of written history. I'm thinking Polynesians and Samoan cultures. There's also cultures where their history was trashed and burned as various governments came in and taken over. And I know this to be true because of several friends who've tried to have me help them with their genealogy, and it's next to impossible because of those limitations. So in that case, you just do the very best you can. Maybe your story is going to be very, very brief, but at least it's something. Okay, Linda. I struggle with my grandfather's story. He was a philandering alcoholic, World War II veteran. These impacted subsequent generations. I think it's essential to include ? Yes. So make sure I think you have it. If you haven't already, go back and watch Writing the Sensitive Stories. Your job is to be neutral. Your job is just to say it is what it was, right? Because again, let's go back to the alcoholism that I've shared. I need to know, and I need to share the fact it's a funny story now because he's deceased and it's been a while. But my great grandfather, George Joseph Geisler, after he got his Friday pay, I won't say a check because it was always in coinage. He got his pay for the week. He would go to a bar and he would drink. And the family story is that as he walked home, he would be like loosely spending his money, dropping it on the ground, and his wife would go and collect the coins to make sure they actually had funds for the week. However, later in life, his grandkids that he lived with, because he lived with the daughter and the daughter had grandkids, they don't remember him drinking at all. And so the alcoholism already did his damage for his children. because there were still subsequent children who had alcohol and drug abuse problems. But there was also a ray of redemption that few people knew because it was just 2 grandchildren that lived with him at that point, and so it did have an impact on them. And so it's important to tell the truth what it was. Now, that was a family legend. I can't actually prove that that's what he did, but that's the family story that's told over and over and over again about him being so drunk after he got his pay period that his wife had to, take the reins on the money so she could eat the family. And because of subsequent generations and the choices they made, the story seems like it actually will fit. And so include it. If you're writing about a World War II veteran, you don't need to glamorize or idolize him. We're grateful for his service because he didn't necessarily have to go. There's a possibility that his character was damaged in war because it can happen. But he also made these decisions as an adult, and it had ramifications. So be neutral and factual, but definitely tell the story. Okay, there are a couple more comments and questions. Okay. I don't see any more comments and questions, but I'm glad you guys really appreciated the live stream. All right, so we'll see you next week, 10 a.m. on Thursday, 10 a.m. Mountain, 12 noon Eastern, and rumor has it's GMT -6 right now. If I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. Bye, guys.